The year is 861 AD. We stand before Baghdad at the height of the Islamic Golden Age in the reign of the Abbasids. This marvelous reconstruction of the round city was brought to you by the Assassin's Creed Mirage team at Ubisoft, who were kind enough to sponsor and let me roam around the city with the sole condition that I share its history. That is certainly something I am eager to oblige. We've actually used Discovery Mode in the past to provide guided historical tours of sites from ancient Egypt and Greece. I honestly think it's one of the best formats for teaching history out there. With this in mind, I'm excited to share with you the wonders of Baghdad and its House of Wisdom. Spoilers, there will be books, lots and lots of books, and you will be killed for stealing them. Assassin's Creed Mirage is available now, so click the link in the description to buy the game and dive in. So as we begin this tour, I know it will be super tempting to just dive right into the city of Baghdad, and I know that's what I did when I got my hands on this game. I was like a kid in a candy shop, I ran through the town, and I spent hours exploring every nook and cranny. But you know me, I like to start with the broad picture, the roots, the origins of everything, and this is something that the game actually knows quite well, because if I go into the map mode here, the game actually does not start you with full access to the round city itself. Rather, the game places you in a small little suburb, a small little village along the side of the Great Tigris River. And this is going to be a good segue for how we can trace the development and the origins of the city of Baghdad. Now, typically when it comes to the origin story for the city of Baghdad, people might start with its first founding, or they might trace the succession of empires, but I wanted to give you a slightly different take on things by seeing Baghdad as a succession not so much of empires, but of great cities that were in place in this region, because an interesting fact is actually that if you were to zoom out on a map, and actually you might be able to see this in an eagle perspective, is that this area is dominated by several important cities which for millennia have been some of the greatest cities of honestly the entire world. And I will name them right now for you, and they should definitely start to ring a bell. The first one is going to be the city of Babylon, which had huge prominence from the 1800s BC up until 300 BC. So let's say Babylon is located down there. It's actually going to be on the Euphrates, and it serves as a power center during the Babylonian, the Assyrian, the Elamite, and the Persian empires, such that by the time that Alexander the Great comes, he actually decides to make it his effective capital. But what is going to be a consistent theme as we trace the breadcrumbs here is going to be the idea that every once in a while you have a ruler or a power that comes in that wants to turn a new page, or that wants to sort of start a new chapter in history. And what they do is they essentially take the old capital and they move slightly down the river. So the first person to do that is going to be Seleucus. So he's going to be a successor to Alexander, and the reason he moves his capital is because he wants to consolidate power. That is one motive. So he sees the existing power structures at Babylon with its priests and its administrators and all the governors and all the important people in Puba whom he has to wrestle for control of his new kingdom and empire. And what he decides to do is embrace the trend of Hellenization and colonization, and he just uproots himself, moves himself down over to actually the Tigris, and is going to be founding a new city in his name called Seleucia. Seleucia is going to be founded on the Hellenistic model, so it's got a Hellenistic plan, it's got theaters, and all the type of things that the Greeks really know and love. And with it, he brings in a bunch of colonists. So that is the first breadcrumb leading us closer to Baghdad, is the shift from Babylon to Seleucia. Now, Seleucia is going to grow to become an important power center because when the Seleucids, they get supplanted by the Parthians are going to make it sort of their capital. And I say sort of their capital because the Parthians, when they come in, they sort of have this roving system of capitals where really the capital is where the royal court is. So they're going to notice that Seleucia is an important power center, let's say here in the city. But what they want to do is they also want to start a new page. And so what they do is they actually set up the royal court just on the opposite side of the river in a small town that at the time is sort of this, no one really recognizes it, town called Ctesiphon. But organically over the years, Ctesiphon is going to be expanded to the point that in the Parthian Empire, it becomes an extremely important city that supplants both Seleucia and Babylon, such that by the time the Sassanids come up, it's essentially the capital of the region. Now this capital of Ctesiphon is going to last right up until the Arab conquest. The next breadcrumb here, linking us over to Baghdad, is going to be the idea that in the 630s AD, you have the followers of Muhammad, which come screaming out of the Arabian Peninsula. They are going to knock down first the Sassanids, and in turn, take over Ctesiphon, and next the Byzantines. And they're going to form an empire that eventually stretches all the way from Iberia in the distant west and stretches all the way to the Indus in the east. And with this kind of broader perspective, they decide that yes, Ctesiphon is still important to them, but they're going to move their capital once more, but to a different place, not down the river. They're going to change up the game here, and they're going to move it over to Damascus and more sort of a Mediterranean focus. And this will last well enough for them because they have a different power structure in mind. The Umayyads, when they take over, what they're going to do is they're going to essentially gobble up all these different populations and set themselves up as a ruling class over the top, kind of in the same way that the Romans did, with a ruling population that lets the underlings do what they want. And this is going to work well enough for a time, but eventually people chafe under the system of government because what they see is, hey, we want a part of this power structure. We don't want just an Arab ruling class. And so what happens is a series of revolts, the most important being the Abbasid revolt. Now this one is going to be key is because they are going to be supported by one of the Persian factions, and they are going to be the ones such that when the Abbasids actually come out victorious and there's going to be this new changing of the guard, a changing of the capital, they decide that we're going to come back to the tradition of having our major cities along the Tigris and Euphrates. And so what they do is you actually have Al-Mansur who comes in, and he's going to be the one who officially founds Baghdad. The legend is that he comes to this area riding on a white horse, and he finds himself, according to the legend, picking a spot in the desert and forming 3 concentric circles and saying, this is going to be my city. He says, quote, I proclaim this to be Medina al-Salam, the city of peace. Now, the real story that you'll understand from our breadcrumbs here is that really there's a tradition of just kind of moving the capital city slightly down the river, and he's going to do that not just for a symbolic reason, but also for the fact that, well, all of these former capitals make really good places to pillage for their raw material to make it easier to build a city. So he does just that. So finally, this gets us to the city of Baghdad that you can see before you. Now, its official founding is going to be in 762 AD. And it's going to take just 4 years to build, which is super impressive when you consider the scale of this thing. It took 100,000 workers to construct, and the end result is what you can see here, although admittedly, at the time of the game, we're actually going to be 100 years after the founding of the city. Nonetheless, you can still see traces of what was the original intent of the city, namely that it is a round city with concentric circles, the innermost circle of which protects the palatial estate, which has all kinds of grounds around it. Now, the initial intent was for this to be an administrative center with barracks and all these official buildings primarily, but what happens oftentimes with these capitals is they draw so many people and they become such a gravitational focus for the empire that all the little nooks and crannies fill in. So that's where you get shops, bazaars, residences, all kinds of things that fill in the gaps. And then beyond that, you have industrial centers and whatnot in suburbs that start sprawling out. So that's what you can see here with the city itself. But still, the main arterial ways exist, the main 4 lines of roads that cross through the city, cross through the center. So one is going to go along this line that I'm showing here, and the other one cuts perpendicular to it across the side. They're each going to be helmed by a major gate that you can see below us that is going to serve for defense and controlling the population. But then along the way, they have all their little idiosyncrasies. You know, they have some that open up on a river, others that might lead out to the desert or to the other important suburbs. So that is going to be it for the origins of Baghdad, the overview of the layout of the city, and with that tease and that intro out of the way, let's go ahead and actually explore the city in person. So here we are at the northwest gate of Baghdad, and as you can tell, it's quite impressive. This was one of the characteristics of the city, the fact that it was built from the start to be a huge cosmopolitan city, and the people, seeing how large it was and seeing how much influence and money was poured into it, were quick to fill it. And this is one of the things that you'll see as we start to get into the city itself here, is going to be the cosmopolitan nature of the citizens. Now, I've run around the city quite a lot, and you can really get a distinct taste of the people, their mannerisms, their clothing. I've seen people from the far, far east, the far, far west, because you have people coming not just from, modern India, but also people coming from all the way in the British Isles, although some of them were most likely slaves, having been traded by Vikings who captured them, shuttled them all the way to the east, and kind of send them into the big machine that was the growing Islamic empire in the east. They needed a lot of labor, they needed a lot of people to support their new cities that were being built. And so during this period, you actually see a lot of influx of labor coming from distant lands, not just to live and be in the city, but unfortunately to be slaves and to be servants. But hopefully some of them down the line could start to make a living. And as you go around the city, you can start to see their influence in all the little details here, in the different cultures that are represented, in the little habits that they have here. And as I go around, you'll see different food stalls, you'll see different clothing stalls, and there's no place better than the Grand Bazaar to show off what this looks like. So let's hop on over there. So here we are outside the Grand Bazaar, and it is truly worthy of its name. A magnificent piece of architecture that speaks to the ingenuity of the architects and the skill of the builders who transformed Baghdad from a small little scrap of desert into this magnificent city. But to get a taste of kind of what's on offer here, let's go ahead and head on inside. As we do so, keep a watchful eye out for all the people here and their different garbs that, indicate to us, again, the cosmopolitan nature of this city, how far flung all the people were, as well as the goods that they brought in. Because, mind you, technology at the time had advanced such that navigation and water travel was far greater than it ever had been before. So while the Roman Empire is known for gathering goods and wares from across the world, the Abbasid Empire was able to go much further than this, and as the beating heart of the empire, Baghdad would have played host to much of this. And you can see this again through all the shops, the stalls, and the people. But one of the things that you'll also notice is books. A surprising number of books spread out across the city in various stalls, to the point that there's actually book vendors that you can interact with and book merchants within the city. This brings us to the next point that I wanted to bring up, is that Baghdad is not just important as a center of people and things, but also of knowledge. And this is going to be a feature that is kind of inherent overall to the Abbasid Caliphate. So let's talk about this. And to do so, we're going to go to another district of the city. So this region is going to be a quite convenient background for talking about how the pursuit of knowledge and the love of learning became quite central to the philosophy of the ruling Abbasids, and especially informing the trajectory of the city of Baghdad. So the TLDR here is basically you have the preceding Umayyads, who were certainly lauded as great conquerors and empire builders, but they set themselves apart. Much in the same way that these guards are doing here, the Umayyads were a ruling class of Arabs who isolated themselves. They put themselves on top of the food chain, ruled over their underlings, but really didn't want to share power, and in doing so were quite insular. But what happened later is that you had their underlings who chafed under this and wanted a piece of the pie. And so there were various revolts, the most prominent of which was the Abbasid revolt, which we covered previously. And what they do is that when they come in, one of their goals is to open up the levers of power. And what happens when you open up power is politics becomes more open, and in turn religion actually becomes more open, and so does society. And this is actually pretty profound, because when it comes to Islam, it becomes no longer a religion purely for the Arab ruling minority, but Islam becomes a world religion for the entire empire, and certainly all the major people in the city here that you can see. Although many religions, as a part of this power sharing structure, many other religions were welcome as well. So you have this influx of all kinds of people, and certainly ideas, which now all of a sudden are open and accepted. And this is really going to be epitomized in the structure that I've been kind of teasing you with behind us, which is going to be the House of Wisdom. So let's go ahead and take a look at this House of Wisdom and see what it's all about. So as we head into the House of Wisdom, one of the things we're going to be presented with is a beautiful building. Now, hats off to the AC Mirage team for building this structure. It is quite impressive. However, I do have to say it is somewhat misleading. The House of Wisdom was not necessarily a singular monolithic structure. Historians are actually somewhat torn on this, although I would lean towards the idea that it was more of a distributed center. So let's speak to this real quickly before we go inside. So the basic argument is, hey, we know from records that the various caliphs did build centralized structures like this. For instance, they would take their palace and build a new wing as a library, or various people would come in and dedicate different wings to various branches of sciences. We know that they built observatories and institutions of higher learning. However, the other argument goes that it was impractical to have all of this and especially all the work that came out of Baghdad, to be attributed to just a single structure. More likely, there were a series of buildings spread across Baghdad which functioned kind of like a college town, where they all had their different locations and areas of focus, but it was very cross-disciplinary, and they could certainly meet up and come together. And so with that disclaimer in mind, let's go ahead and answer the question, what exactly were they doing within the House of Wisdom? So one of the major things that happened is that they were collecting books. So you can imagine this started off as a library, whereas the Abbasid and the preceding Umayyad Empire expands, they want to basically bring back, treasures and goods back home. Now, during the Umayyad era, certainly they brought back books, and some people became interested in seeing what these books said, translating them, and this was certainly important work that kicked off the translation movement. Later, however, what you have is with the Abbasids, as we stated previously, were more open to different ideas, and so it wasn't just translation, but it started to be actually delving into these sources and coming to understand what they meant. And one of the important things that you can do when you translate works, especially from different time periods, different authors, and different geographic locations, is if there's a bunch of different thoughts on, let's say, philosophy or arithmetic, you can start to compare and contrast those thoughts. So we'll go in here and we'll give you an example of this. So here is a library where, for instance, in the House of Wisdom, let's go in this corner, and perhaps you have someone who's working on a particular translation. They have assistants who help them do the rote translation and transcription, but then alongside them, they might have another buddy who's translating another work, or perhaps they have multiple works that are being translated at the same time, and someone here has to then consider what is the correct source of truth, which of these sources has the best knowledge. And so what they do is, over time, by comparing works, they can synthesize them. And not only do they synthesize these works, but they can actually add their own learned commentary. They can start to do their own novel research and experimentation. So you have this rich translation movement that expands into quite novel research taking place in these various houses. And so you have all these tomes that start to come together. And more importantly, you have folks who, as they put this together, are valued for their work and their contributions, to the point that apparently translators would be paid the equivalent of their book's weight in gold. People can start to make a living, not only as translators, but also as a support staff. So now you have an industry, and as the industry grows, it becomes more societally accessible. As that happens, more people are inclusive and willing to entertain the idea that this is a noble pursuit for their sons and their children. And eventually this is a virtuous cycle that really opens up the Abbasid and the city of Baghdad to learning. And they have a lot of these important treaties. And we could go into more and more of this. The works and the manuscripts that come out of the House of Wisdom are prolific in nature. Lists could go on and on, all the different contributors. We have a separate video on this if you want to learn more, but I'll essentially leave it there with that story. And this is really the important story of the House of Wisdom. Some other anecdotes that I wanted to throw in here is that basically there are stories of caliphs who were so ravenous for knowledge that they were willing to essentially treat books as war bounty. In various treaties with the Byzantines, they would demand the handover of specific books and translations. When it came to actually having convoys that went around the empire, there were caravans of hundreds of camels which were carrying on manuscripts and bringing them back to Baghdad. So that really speaks to the thirst for knowledge that was going on here. And the Assassin's Creed team has really done a great job of bringing this to light, not only by bringing the House of Wisdom to light here, but also infusing it across the landscape of the environment of Baghdad. You'll see bookstores popping up everywhere. There's even specialized quest line for helping out scholars. And I even found this awesome town crier who is talking to the public about the latest manuscripts which have been published, announcing the scholars who are in town and the lectures that they're giving. So I think they've really done a good job of capturing the essence of this movement and the city of Baghdad and its character. So I hope with that you've really appreciated our tour of the city of Baghdad. I hope you've learned a lot, and I hope to see you in future episodes, as hopefully we can dive into more history of Baghdad and other historical sites in the world of Assassin's Creed. So again, thank you so much to the AC Mirage team for sponsoring this episode. Check out the game, which is available now by clicking the link in the description below to purchase it, and dive on in. Enjoy.